E.T., the Extra-Terrestrial, is one of those rare films that feels like a dream come to life on the big screen. I still remember being a kid, looking up at the stars and wishing I had a magical alien best friend of my own. Honestly, I'm willing to bet most of you watching this felt the exact same way growing up. On this channel, we dive deep into the movie magic and behind-the-scenes stories you love. And today, we're breaking down the making of E.T. Director Steven Spielberg didn't just treat this as a sci-fi flick. He approached it as an emotional fairy tale. To keep the plot from leaking, the production was shot under the secret working title A Boy's Life. Believe it or not, principal photography was wrapped in just 61 days, which is lightning fast by Hollywood standards. Spielberg also used a unique technique. He shot the film in chronological order. This allowed the child actor's emotional bond with E.T. to grow naturally as the story progressed. One of the funniest and most memorable moments in the film is when little Gertie first meets E.T. and both of them scream at each other in pure shock. In behind-the-scenes footage, however, you can see that 6-year-old Drew Barrymore was completely calm and comfortable on set. The scream wasn't accidental, it was a well-rehearsed performance. Spielberg carefully instructed her to scream at full intensity the moment E.T. appeared. What makes this scene special is the contrast. Off-camera, Drew was playful and relaxed, even interacting with the E.T. puppet like it was a toy. But the moment the director called action, she instantly delivered that iconic terrified expression. At such a young age, she showed remarkable professionalism. The environment on set was supportive and relaxed. Spielberg stood behind the camera, gently guiding her performance. That's why the scene feels spontaneous, even though it was carefully planned. In the opening sequence of the movie, we are introduced to a group of alien botanists who have landed on Earth to collect plant specimens. When human authorities arrive, they are forced to flee in a hurry, accidentally leaving E.T. stranded and alone. This entire sequence was filmed on location in the majestic, towering redwood forests of Northern California. The atmosphere in these scenes is thick with mystery. You'll notice the heavy fog and the beams of light piercing through the trees. Interestingly, that look wasn't created with computers, it was all practical. They used massive industrial smoke machines and carefully positioned high-intensity lights to create that ethereal, spooky glow. You can see the crew managing these elements in the footage right here. Back in 1982, CGI wasn't an option for a production like this. This meant that every glowing alien plant, every strange flower, and the entire environment had to be built by hand as physical props. Spielberg was adamant that everything the actors interacted with should be real. He believed that if the environment were physical, the actors' performances would be more grounded and authentic. When the alien craft descends, and we see the massive ship of the landing site, it's easy to believe it's a full-size vessel. However, the reality is a bit smaller. What you're actually seeing is an incredibly detailed, average-size scale model. In this behind-the-scenes clip, you can see the crew members standing right next to the ship, which finally gives you a sense of its pure physical size. The geniuses over at Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, spent months designing this model. They wanted a design that looked futuristic but also felt organic, almost like a living thing rather than a cold metal machine. During the shoot, the ramp movement and the flashing lights weren't controlled by a computer program. They were operated manually using physical switches, pulleys, and cables. The scene is a masterpiece in how old-school craftsmanship combined with clever lighting and a little bit of smoke can create a visual that feels just as real as anything made with modern tech today. One of the most charming parts of the film is when E.T. is left home alone. He starts exploring the house, watching TV, and essentially learning about human culture through commercials and cartoons. This is where he gets the spark of inspiration for his phone home device. The E.T. you see in these scenes is a marvel of 80s engineering. Designed by the legendary Carlo Rambaldi, this was a high-end animatronic puppet. Because E.T. needed to show such a wide range of feelings, the team actually created 4 different interchangeable heads for the puppet. Each head was designed for specific emotions, one for curiosity and shock, another for sadness, and others for excitement or exhaustion. Everything E.T. used to build his communication device, the speak and spell toy, the umbrella, the coffee cans, the wires, and the foil, were real physical objects. As you can see in these behind-the-scenes clips, the puppeteers were so skilled that they could make the puppet pick up these items and move them around the table with surprising precision. There's also a hilarious blooper moment in this footage, where the E.T. puppet loses its balance and faceplants onto the floor, causing the entire crew to burst out laughing. It reminds you that even on blockbuster sets, things can get a little messy. Now we come to the most iconic moment in cinematic history, the scene where E.T. uses his powers to lift Elliot's bicycle into the air. When you watch the movie, it looks like they are truly soaring over the treetops, but the reality was much more down to earth. The actors were actually inside a soundstage, strapped into bicycle rigs that were mounted on massive crane arms. They filmed this against a giant blue screen. Later, the footage of the forest and the night sky was layered in during post-production. And that world-famous shot of the silhouette passing in front of the massive moon? That wasn't a real moon at all. It was a combination of a highly detailed matte painting and a complex compositing process. By layering different pieces of a film on top of each other, they created an image so powerful that it eventually became the logo for Spielberg's production company, Amblin Entertainment. There is a subtle but brilliant moment when E.T. is creeping around Elliot's house, and we see his glowing footsteps appearing on the pathway. Again, there was zero digital animation involved here. This was a pure practical effect. To make this happen, the production team created custom molds, or stamps, in the exact shape of E.T.'s three-toed feet. Before the cameras rolled, the crew spread a thin layer of fine powder, or light soil, over the pathway. Then, as the camera tracked along, crew members would manually press these molds into the ground one by one to simulate a walking creature. To give the footsteps that eerie alien glow, they placed tiny light sources inside the molds, or used fluorescent paint that would react to UV lights. It was a tedious, frame-by-frame process, but it created a perfect illusion. To the audience, it really looked like an invisible visitor was walking right toward the house. When Elliot hears strange noises behind his house and steps into the backyard to investigate, the atmosphere suddenly shifts. What should feel like a safe suburban space transforms into something mysterious, almost alien. On screen, we see a small shed area and a patch of cornfield behind the house. It looks like a real outdoor location, natural light, quiet, and slightly eerie, but most of this environment was recreated on a soundstage. For this sequence, the production team planted real corn stalks inside the studio. They physically built the backyard environment so it would perfectly match the exterior of Elliot's house. The goal wasn't just realism, it was control. Shooting indoors allowed them to shape every shadow, every beam of light, and every movement of smoke. From a technical perspective, director Steven Spielberg made a brilliant choice here. He used low-angle tracking shots, positioning the camera closer to Elliot's height. This makes the audience experience the moment from a child's point of view. We don't feel like observers, we feel like we're right there with him. The set was filled with heavy artificial smoke, so much so that the studio walls completely disappeared. The haze added depth and scale, making the backyard look endless and isolated, even though it was just a controlled indoor space. Right at the start of the film, there's a scene where Elliot's older brother and his friends are hanging out, eating pizza and playing games. It feels incredibly authentic, like a real slice of 1980s American life. Spielberg wanted the audience to feel like they were fly-on-the-wall observers in a real household. To achieve this, he didn't force the actors to stick to a rigid, word-for-word script. Instead, he encouraged them to improvise. He let the boys actually eat the pizza and play a real game of Dungeons and Dragons while the cameras rolled. This allowed for natural overlapping dialogue, genuine laughter, and a bit of brotherly bickering. This naturalistic approach is why the chemistry between the kids feels so real, because in those moments, they were just being kids. And that's what makes E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial so special. If you enjoyed this behind-the-scenes breakdown, please consider liking the video. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe for more cinematic BTS stories and filmmaking secrets. And let me know in the comments, which movie should we explore next?